All right, here we go. You guys are in for a big treat. We're
Yeah,
pumping and jumping for sure after this one.
yeah, this was cool. And this was another family member of Mark. Mark's bringing in, oh, I guess my brother joined us once. I was gonna say Mark is outdoing me with the family member guests, but
And they sure are full of shit. I mean, full of information.
yeah, they need to go to the restroom before they show up in our recording room. Um,
No, but for real, Doug is a real bona fide source of amazing creativity. This conversation went directions we didn't totally anticipate, and wow, are we richly rewarded for it.
yeah.
I can't wait for you to hear what he has to say. And again, like this guy's been in my life since I was a kid, and he is a big influence on my thinking and my artistic orientation. And you will learn a lot about what art is and what we can do with art. So yeah, subscribe, share, make comments on the medium. Like if you listen on Apple Podcasts, please make a comment and keep drinking adrenochrome cola. Oh, and there might be a little bit of a visual difference than what you're used to if you watch this on YouTube, but you'll have to stay tuned to see what that is.
It reminded me of the band's The Big Pink.
Got it.
Sis, hallo?
11, 11, 11, 11.
Bestuur zeker wegen dem.
Joey iets niet, joh.
Sitaki ubenza, anika sirikie.
Two outlaws on the lam, taking the back roads through America.
You can't drink enough coffee for this show.
And now it's time for Monday Madness with the Moped Outlaws, Greg and Mark.
And we're live with another episode of the Moped Outlaws. I'm super stoked to have our guest today, Doug Wendt. He has a master's in film from the San Francisco Art Institute. He's a musician, songwriter, music journalist, musicologist, radio show host, DJ, VJ for both club and festivals, concert promoter, father, family man, and creator. And I could go on and on. He has been the host of several amazing radio shows starting way back in the beginning on KUDI with Man of Constant Sorrow, Doug Wendt's World Beat Sundays at the Kennel Club, the world famous reggae music show Midnight Dread. He's been on KPFA, KPOO, KFOG. His current offerings are two radio shows, which you can get on Mix.com. And Mixcloud. We'll put the links for this in the show folder, so you don't have to listen to me. But his shows, Best of All Worlds and Deep 60s, I was listening to that before this show. Oh, my goodness. Oh, and he's my father's brother. So I've had the benefit of his influence in my creative life so strongly, and so much of who I am today as a result of Doug's creative output and the inspiration I've gotten from it. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's what I said to my date last night.
Oh, goodness. So I want to talk about the early things that inspired you to get into radio. And I believe KUDI was the first station you were on with Man of Constant Sorrow. Is that correct?
Yeah, I actually did a high school news show called Bison Review, which led to KUDI. It was on KUDI. They had both high schools in town. They gave them 15 minutes a week.
Is KUDI the Davis University station?
No, it was a top 40 AM station in Great Falls, Montana, with a huge signal. Literally covered the whole Midwest. And then at night, when the sun goes down, they had to redirect the transmitters, and we're right next to Canada in Great Falls. So I had this amazing audience with this completely over the top, never heard before radio show in the summers of 68 and 69, which basically connects exactly to the moment in history we're in right now. I mean, going back to 68, it's almost like I'm back on the air to finish the job. because all that music, especially from '67, is just kick ass. There's nothing that even comes close to the music and the vibes of 1967. I just picked up another box set this week of 90 songs from 1967 I'd never heard before. I'll put any of that stuff up against anything coming out today. It's amazing. Yeah, so I was inspired by this high school radio show, which led to me getting to know the station owners, the Graybills, who ended up rewriting the Montana State Constitution in 1972. We have the most liberal state constitution in the country because we were kind of late to the party. Everybody started updating the constitutions because of the 60s Freedom Festival. And so, it's amazing. Even the person that started local public radio here in town, Arlene Reichert, was another big person in those days. So there's a really big connection between kind of this remote, anything goes, super tolerance of rural Montana with freeform radio, which I had actually experienced. I went to Whittier College in Southern California from 67 to 68. And the very first underground FM station in the world was in Pasadena. It predated KMPX and KSAN, some of the same people. So I was just dropped into in the fall of 1967 when I finally left Montana after 1 year in Bozeman at Montana State. Went to Whittier College in Southern California and heard all this amazing music from 1967 on a completely freeform station, and went back to Montana in 68 that summer and was hired by KUDI to do a nightly primetime combination top 40 underground FM show. Nice. With this enormous signal covering the entire Midwest. And me, being interested in radio as art, immediately started, and there weren't even names for any of this stuff back then, but I started scratching and looping, and I was fascinated by all the inputs in the station control room, 3 turntables, 5 cart machines, quarter-inch tape decks, and then there's a production studio right next door, so you got all these inputs in there, and you can put those all through the main board. So basically, you got a 24-track and 16-track studio in a radio station in the late 1860s because you can layer all this stuff, and with the use of cart machines, you can create what I used to call dread bits when I did Midnight Dread. These little stingers and that Mikey Dread cut for me and other things. So I was really more fascinated not only by the great music coming out in that era, and of course being on the air the night we landed on the moon live. I was actually on the air live when Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon. I was on the air live when the Chicago riots happened in 68. I mean, that was like every night. Remember, that was every night. So it just seems really appropriate that I find myself doing this deep 60s show, which I kind of started on KECG in El Cerrito with Corey Mason in your neck of the woods on World One back in the 90s. But it became a weekly show here in Great Falls about 3 years ago. And I just knew I needed to get back on the air. I call it smudge the airwaves. So I smudge the airwaves with world music on every Monday. And then I dive into all the 60s music. And what I was telling Marc about last week, I discovered that since I went off to school in 66, I kind of lost touch with top 40 radio for a few years. So there's a lot of great 60s music I never heard. And so now that I've kind of gone through all my world music and reggae phases and everything, I'm really landing on, my goodness, not only is there hardly one bad record released in 1967, like there's not a bad reggae record released in 1976. It's hard to find a bad reggae record from 1976. It's really hard to find a bad rock record from 1967 because, especially in the United States, we were all lit up. The whole country was lit up. The most expensive records on eBay are these garage band records from 66, 67. There was never, and most of the people weren't smoking. They weren't taking psychedelics. It just lit up everybody. You know, it's really a phenomenon. And I think Marc's been listening to my latest Deep 60s show. I try to play a big chunk of these records nobody's heard. Because at this point, the stupid rules of commercial radio that it has to have been a hit or has to go through a focus group or has to be familiar or sound like everything else. I mean, you just go down the list of everything that destroyed rock and roll, and that's what radio did to it. And so it's phenomenal to now realize most everybody who's listening to my show in 2024 is not my age. We're dying off like millions a day. So everybody who tunes in hasn't heard any of this stuff. So they're not interested in familiarity or what was a hit. And all that stuff was so overplayed by radio being so terrible for 50 years. Really awful. I mean, they killed rock and roll. It took a special talent to actually kill rock and roll.
Well, do you think it's possible, since radio's definitely depleted as a media mogul, do you think it's possible that it'll go back to that era of freeform FM?
It has to. It's the human element that's rare. And the robots are terrible. I mean, they would never have played what I played on the air in 68 and 69, not in a million years. And what I do every week now on the world music show or the 60s show, you know. And I kind of laugh at all my radio professional friends who grew up in this era of familiarity and hits, and they're really still stuck on it. And it's hilarious. I mean, the local classic rock station plays like 200 songs.
Were there any outlaws or peers that you worked with who had your same vision of radio as an artistry expression?
Not really, because I kept it up with Midnight Dread. If you listen to the Midnight Dread shows, I'm messing with when I discovered dub music, I flipped out. I mean, that was right down my alley. I went to Ashkenaz in Berkeley to see Tony Wright when I didn't even know Tony. He was a Jamaican in, let me get some water. He was a Jamaican in, it's in the Bay Area. I like my look. Yeah, so he really blew my mind when he flipped this record over and there was a dub on the other side. And I went, my God, psychedelic music is back. Wow. The Jamaicans hooked up to the psychedelic sounds of 67 and created dub about that time and realized the engineer is also an artist and the radio DJ is also an artist. And you can create totally, and of course with dub music, you can really go crazy. That's why I had so much fun on Midnight Dread, because it's already kind of X-ray music. There's all this stuff missing, and the beauty of reggae is what's not there. That's what Marc, I know, is very aware of. It's all the notes you don't play that make it so great. Yeah. So
let me ask you a question. How did this love of collage and this discovery of audio inputs and multi-layering lead you to study film?
Well, because living next to Canada and being in a very remote town to this day, we didn't really have any TV till 56, 57. In fact, one of the stations that went on the air up here, the day they went on the air, the wind blew so hard here, the transmitter was just blowing down. It was hilarious. Us kids were just waiting and waiting to have a television station, you know, because then we could watch cartoons after school for a couple hours. You know, TV was only on the air from like 4 o'clock to 10 o'clock, you know, and for a long time you would just watch the white noise. You get your TV set, and there were no channels, so you just watch white noise every night. It was really funny. But anyway, we ended up getting cable TV way before anybody else. Okay. And that a lot of stuff happens in Montana that way because they're testing stuff out. And for some reason, our market here is really a perfect market representing the United States. So we got Canadian television. They beamed in Canadian television, and I discovered that there's a whole support for the arts in Canada that is just so foreign to this country. It's almost like, how could we border each other? I mean, they have a huge budget. I think our budget in America for the arts is like 1% or something, but in Canada it's more closer to 7-8%. So there's a National Film Board of Canada which goes out and seeks artists like Norman McLaren and other people. And I discovered at a very early age there was this really weird movie called Help, My Snowman is Burning. I looked that one up. It's really good. And so before a Hard Day's Night and all that weird stuff, I actually saw some non-narrative, absurd, surrealistic, pure cinema, which really excited me because, you know, basically to this day, almost everything Hollywood puts out is for a proscenium arch. It's all designed to frame it with a proscenium arch and tell a story and have a 3-part story and have the myth of the journey and all this crazy narrative cliches, which are so boring and have nothing really to do with the incredible metaphysical nature of life. I mean, how many metaphysical films have we ever had besides maybe 2001 Tree of Life or something? I don't know. There's not very many that even try. And it's weird because there's like a million ways you could look at the universe, but we have no imagination how to depict that in film.
You know what I've been wondering, and I haven't seen it, but Coppola's new film that just came out,
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that is his metaphysical take. And
yes.
Yeah, that's.
I'll be going at 1 p.m. this afternoon.
Oh, I look forward to hearing what you think.
Yeah, Mark said he was going to see it. I wanted to know if he'd seen it yet because the reviews are unbelievably bad and good.
Yes.
Yeah.
How did Help My Snowman is Burning inspire you to go to San Francisco Art Institute? Like, take us down the path that moved you to get into understanding visual art.
Well, my background was with your grandfather, my dad, and they had an advertising agency in Great Falls. And it was really crazy in the 50s and 60s, and it was mostly Republicans. And unlike my older brothers, your dad, I was hauled around to all these Mad Men conventions in all these cities, most every major city in the country I was taken to as a really young kid and grew up and was exposed to these crazy ad men, just like in the TV series, except they're actually worse. They're really nuts, but they're great because they're all totally frustrated artists and they want to make money. And that's really the only way to do it is to go into advertising. So that was my background. And so I was kind of expected to go into that, even though there was no pressure. And so I went to Bozeman and started. Basically, I wanted to go to college and get a well-rounded education because that's the frustrating thing about this hatred of college educations these days. Is I really wanted to live in a society where there's a lot of people that went to college and got a general education and know something about everything, at least know a little something about everything. And so right away when I went to college, I studied philosophy and world religion and all this stuff and took some filmmaking stuff. And for the first time got out of the public school system, which is actually really constricted. And so that led me, combined with my interest in Canadian short films, that and of course the world was really going through major changes, 66, 67, 68. In fact, you know, your dad is only 7 years younger than me, but he's like from a different world. And his older brother's like 7 years older than him. He's really in a different world. And there's actually people that graduated from high school in the 60s. From year to year, they're just completely different people because the culture changed so rapidly, so quickly. So I never thought I was an artist. I never thought I had any artistic orientation until I got into college. And by the time I had 2 years of college and decided to go to the Art Institute in San Francisco and do filmmaking, I realized, God, everything's so disrupted. 1968 was a terrible year in terms of the assassinations. My dad died. My dad died right between RFK and Martin Luther King. And that's when I came home and did The Man of Constant Sorrow to live with my just widowed mom and to decide what I'm going to do with my life. And I started to realize that, God, I really like these non-narrative movies. And The Hard Day's Night was a big hit. And it was really a kind of absurd classic. You know, kind of in the Seinfeld mode. It's a film about nothing.
Right.
Hard Day's Night's about the Beatles being super popular and it's bizarre and they're being chased around. And it's you know, that alone is enough of a story. Yeah, so I always thought the story in art was not a three-part play. So I always thought the proscenium arch use of film was a really waste of time, even though I love a lot of movies like that. And so, I decided
to the Art Institute around
the Art Institute and study film to go into art. That I did in the 1967, 68. What the world was telling me was to follow your bliss.
Has that worked out?
Problem without doing that.
At this point in your life, as you look around, are you happy you followed your bliss?
Absolutely.
Right on.
Yeah. I mean, Marc kind of described all the stuff I've done. And it's funny, I take my resume around to straight people and they just laugh. I'm not focused on buckling under. And it really scares people.
Do you think that spirit is needed today?
Yeah, like freeform radio is in fact, there's this art group in New York City. You can look it up in the New York Times. I forget the name of them, but they tried an art project a couple years ago through their small neighborhood art college in the city of New York. And they realized, wow, we could have a little low transmitter radio station and just kind of reach everybody that goes to this art school because we're all kind of living nearby. So they just kind of innocently reinvented radio. And now it's actually turned into this kind of thing, which may actually disrupt Spotify and Pandora and all this crap and put people back in control of curating. And I think that's when people will really reject. What's so frustrating about Pandora and Spotify is that they're totally set up to pay all these obscure artists a little money. We finally have an internet and a financial system and a way to deliver money to people, which could really take advantage of small niche markets and really support a lot of really important nutrients in our society. Because to me, it's not the mainstream that the action's in. The mainstream is always in the eddies and currents on the side of the stream. You know, that's where the action actually is. That's where you usually go fishing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man,
So what I'm recognizing, and this is a thread I think I've known about you for a long time, Doug, is that like a lot of artists, you're not really very comfortable talking about yourself because it's not about your celebrity or you making you the focus, because it's actually about the expression of the art as the thing that tells that story. And so I keep coming back to these kind of biographical questions because I think your story is so powerful. So you end up at the Art Institute, you're making films, and at that time there's a kind of revolution in Hollywood, right? This is when Coppola and Lucas and
Zoetrope is happening.
Yeah.
Zoetrope's happening down the street.
And so what was it like being a student filmmaker and a a person who wanted non-narrative visual expression to be your thing in that environment? What was happening at that point, and who were the people that you connected with?
Well, there's this thing that's still ongoing called Canyon Cinema, and there was a Cinematheque at the Art Institute where they had weekly screenings of all these great filmmakers, people like Stan Brakhage and Larry Jordan and Peter Kubelka. There's a ton of them, and it was. I tell this story, people just think, really? I go, yeah. You would go to the Canyon Cinematheque on a Thursday night. The place would be overrun with people. It'd be packed. There'd be people sitting on the steps. It was the Art Institute had just built a new auditorium, so it was like kind of exciting. And then you'd be treated to 10, 12, 15, 20 movies, all exploring actual cinema and the language of actual cinema and what that is, and often silent, because putting music to it just screws everything up. And it took me a long time to realize how true that was. Because Stan Brakhage, basically, he's considered the biggest genius in real filmmaking. And he did almost all of his films silent. So you would go to these Canyon Cinematheque underground, non-narrative, experimental. All the words are inadequate. I think the best word is expanded cinema, proscenium arch dominated 3-act play cinema.
Yeah.
Nobody's life is a 3-act play. I'm sorry.
Did you like the documentary that Robert Downey Jr. did with his father?
Yeah.
That opened me up to Robert Downey Sr.'s films, which seemed to be in that realm of very open-ended narratives and the filmmaker pursuing whims while in production.
Yeah, because it's the happy accidents is where the magic happens.
Yeah.
And that's what I was watching. I told Mark, I finally watched Hearts of Darkness, a filmmaker's apocalypse, just a few weeks ago. And I watched Burnham of Dreams, Les Blank's movie on Fitzcarraldo.
Yeah.
And talk about two guys going into the jungle,
right,
who both have this idea of kind of vibing out a movie. They have no script. And it was hilarious seeing George Lucas in the Apocalypse Hearts of Darkness movie saying all this relevant stuff about the poor guy never had a script. And of course, if you go back and look at Hearts of Darkness, a filmmaker's apocalypse, it starts off with, was it John Milius? I forget who the actual scriptwriter for Apocalypse Now was. He just reads the last scene from the original script. It's brilliant. There's nothing wrong with it. Yeah. That's kind of what they end up with after he goes through 30 years of fighting himself over his own great movie and finally makes the cut of it, in 2005 or whenever that was. That is actually the movie he should have released in 1975, And what's funny is this is the struggle in Zoetrope between George and Francis is the struggle between this overemphasized hero's journey of Joseph, what's his name? Campbell? Is that it?
Yeah, Joseph Campbell.
Yeah. And the 3-act play. And then you see a movie like Text of Light by Stan Brakhage, who I think is the greatest movie ever made. And poor Stan shot the whole thing through ashtrays. It's like a 45-minute movie of refracted light, silent. And he permanently put his neck out making this movie because he was always looking for the weirdest pieces of glass you could find. The last thing he wanted was a prism, And the stuff that refracted lights makes on film is unbelievable. And only one guy has made a movie that I'm aware of. Anyway, and then now we have TikTok and kind of this infantilization of filmmaking, where everyone has access to like the greatest cameras Hollywood ever did in their phone. And they have ability to loop it They create all this stuff in a totally alternate universe of news and art. But I think we, no matter what we try as human beings to automate stuff, we're constantly pulled back to, we're not robots. You know, it's the wonderfulness of serendipity, which, like I said, happy accidents. And I saw both Herzog and Coppola talk about, that's why you run film all the time. That's why I realized when I was doing my 60s radio show, it's too bad I didn't have access to cassettes back then. I would have taped every show. I have very few recordings of those early shows. But I realized back then, tape everything. And of course, now that you can get a 80-minute CD for 15 cents, et cetera, and digital is even more, and I was trying to think of the word. Digital is not very save worthy. You can't really save digital stuff. CDs,
it's an impermanent medium.
Yeah, all of that, there you go, impermanent. So in that spirit, it's just really important to run film, run tape, because the magic happens like it did at the Kennel Club, Mark.
Yeah.
Some of my best bits at the Kennel Club were when I would put I had all these Betamax machines, I would put them in pause, and I would forget the sound was up. And so after 5 minutes, they would just roll.
Ah.
And that whole bit I did with Shinhead O'Connor singing War on Saturday Night Live and tearing up the picture of the Pope, and Shabba Ranks coming in and singing this horrible dance hall song, Lover Man.
Yeah.
And so I'm running Shabba Ranks one night at the Kennel Club because I wanted people to see this dance hall music and how it was depicted visually. It was hard to find some tracks I could actually morally show, because dance hall music is really Devo on so many levels. A lot of modern reggae and a lot of modern music.
Yeah.
I haven't heard a chord change in a modern song in 20 years or something, 30 years. Did you hear about the Sergio Mendes song that has 22 chord changes in the first 3 minutes?
No, but I'm going to find out.
Yeah.
Rick Beato? He's on YouTube. Yeah. The most complex song, Rick Beato. Google that. Okay. Yeah. So Cynthia Weil and Barry Mann wrote the song in the early 90s. Sergio Mendes produced it. And it went straight to number one. It's because, people that wrote songs understood that a key change creates a certain intention in a song that's very addictive. Yeah. So Cynthia and Barry sat down and they wrote this song. And like the intro, key change. The very first part of the song, key change. Goes to a little break, key change. I mean, literally every part of the song. And I just, wow. So my idea was watching that. Now I'm gonna get that Sergio Mendes song, and I'm gonna go back to practicing my guitar. I'm gonna learn all those chords. They're the weirdest jazz chords you've ever seen. If I learn that song, I'm set to go.
Yeah.
I'll have 22 keys in my head, and how they fit together, and how they're actually the same chords, just slightly different. Yeah.
Let me ask you this, as you're talking about creativity, I've heard a few guitarists talk about Eddie Van Halen and how any technical adept guitarist can learn an Eddie Van Halen riff, but it doesn't sound like Eddie playing it. What is the juice that differentiates that from just a technically played piece to an artistically played piece?
Just the individuality of the human brain.
So you think it's strictly an intellectual endeavor?
It's just, we're wired. I wouldn't even say it's mental. It's physical. It's the way we're all wired is different.
Well, so in that realm, like one of the elements, and as you know with your brother, the spiritual realm is an area that Mark and I love to explore. Is that a part of your own exploration of what life is?
Yeah.
And how does that show up publicly?
Well, you're trying to express that because you have a real frustration. And you look at, you look at the Bible or Shakespeare, some of these really iconic places of the human condition. I mean, that's basically what we're dealing with here. What is the human condition? And narrative filmmakers, that's all they want to pummel you over the head with, is that really awful to navigate human condition, which in the modern world is even more confusing. And it's actually, the human condition is looking at like a Van Gogh painting, and it's just a still image, right? You're looking at this Van Gogh painting, and it starts to move, and it starts to take you to a place you've never thought about, and your mind clears out, and you get this feeling of joy, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the human condition, except that is the human condition. And that's why when people talk about the escapism of movies and losing themselves in a film, the older I get, the harder it is for me to watch these narrative human condition films, because they all want to drag me into that buzzkill or that buzzsaw. When the actual buzz doesn't go away, it's eternal, it's universal, it's in the Transcendental Meditation, it's in that Text of Light movie, or the Tree of Life, like that Tree of Life movie, which I just saw recently. And Mark is actually somebody who told me about it 10 years ago or so.
Wow.
Am I giving you the right title?
Yeah, Tree of Life, that's it.
Yeah. That was really gets into the male identity. That's what blew me about that movie that I wasn't expecting. What was going to be the heart of that movie was young boys hanging out and what they do to entertain themselves. That is a complete mind blower. And there's so many things in Tree of Life that happen to you as a human being that have never been depicted in a film.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's almost like one scene after another, and they come so quick. I was breathless watching that thing. And like going, wow, all these people that have run all this footage of film, and they're trying to capture the human condition, the human spirit, or what they're like, what Greg was talking about. What is driving this artistic drive? And it turns out that it's really basic and simple. It's the joy of actually being alive.
Joy of being alive. Yeah. What I noticed in observing your progression as a filmmaker, as a young boy and a young man, was you went from these non-narrative teleplays, Time Off, various things. And then one of the final pieces in the progression is this film called dub film. And dub film could be talked about as non-narrative. There's a lot of labels I could use. And the way the sound sync worked was somewhat of a miracle / happy accident. But once you understood it, it took a lot of work to get it to where you wanted it. But then that moves you into the realm of public performance of visual art and using music. And you spoke about the randomness of the Kennel Club and the way that certain things just happen. And you were one of the first public performance DJs that I ever heard of that had multi-layered psychedelia, but not psychedelia. It was like organic, it was African, it was Asian and Eurasian and South American and all of these things. So there's this thread of trying to evoke spirit without touching the hardcore ABCD story, because that doesn't actually give you the full level of inspiration. And so there's this thread in your art of abstraction, random occurrence as the revelation of higher spirit, of the creative potential.
Yes, dub film is a key film. Yeah, dub film came out of Evil and the Snake, which is a story with Mark and his dad. When we came up to Montana. I just remember it as the summer of When Doves Cry by Prince. That song by Prince was such a mind blower to me. I'd never heard anything like When Doves Cry. It was so different from anything. And I never was really much of a Prince guy until I heard that. And I remember we were coming back from staying with Grandma Dorothy, and we decided to time our trip by car back to California through Twin Falls because Evel Knievel was going to jump the Snake River. Right? I forget the exact date, September 12th or something. I forget.
I don't
September
remember
8th.
exactly. Something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. And you had gotten, as a result of being the filmmaker you had gotten some stock from Kodak that was experimental film stock, right?
I got
Chemical.
tons of free film, and it was all psychedelic. It was all solarized, weird colors. I loved it. I shot all this stuff just because I could run film. Yeah. And so we're driving into Twin Falls, and it looks like we're going to time it just when he's going to finally make the jump. Remember, his jump kept on being delayed. And so it actually looks like we're going to drive into Twin Falls right when he's going to jump. And we turn on the radio, and we hear the news that Ford has pardoned Nixon.
That's got to be surreal.
Okay, and that has led to this pile of shit we're in right now. That is it. That's the moment when bribery became a tip and when some folks are above the law. So those are the two questions for all your right-wing friends.
When
Do you
did it
think
all
it's
go
okay
bad?
that bribery is a tip and that some folks are above the law? I would like to know one thing that's in our Constitution those guys still agree to, and one thing that Jesus said any of them agree to. Just one thing. I'm not asking for anything because they have nothing.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was really a devastating moment to live through all that shit of the late 60s and those assassinations and the destruction of all the optimism and love and joy and actual laws that were about to be passed in 1967, which still have not been passed. And we may get a chance here next year to see all that just tossed down the toilet when Ford pardoned Nixon. Anyway, so that put us in the weirdest mood to go into the evil thing. So anyway, I shot the evil thing on this psychedelic stock, and it came out really weird, and I had to go through all these tests with Leo Diner, and I spent a fortune trying to get color tests on the Evel Knievel footage so I could make a print of it and make a finished movie, which is a silent movie. It's just him. You know, just what we saw as we walked up on the scene is actually a great little movie.
Right.
Anyway, so I had all these, I'm looking at all these test strips in front of my edit station one day. There's like about 70 of them. And I'm like going, Jesus, these all cost me like $30 each or something. I spent a fortune on these test strips. Why don't I randomly make 2 Mobius strips and bipack them in my optical printer? So while we're talking about 2 not same length film loops that flip left to right whenever it comes back to their slice, and I'm going to shoot 100 feet on my optical printer and see what happens. So,
And that's the origin of the dub film.
right. So then I do that, and I think, okay, well, this is kind of visual representation of dub music. And it's perfect because it's really nothing shot. It's a test strip. So it's random things. And then there's a few weird things from the Evel Knievel movie where I have my hand in front of the camera, you know, making some kind of sign to mark the shot or something, you know. Yeah, so I just said, I should use this Augustus Pablo song. So there was no attempt made to sync it up at all. So anyway, it was just, when I first shot it, it blew my mind. It was perfectly synced up. And it had all this black in it, like reggae. You know, like actually when you project a movie at 24 frames per second, or you watch it on TV, 30 frames per second, half the time you're sitting in the dark. So I was thinking about dub music and how reggae, half the time you're like in the dark with the reggae because it's such a friend of mine, Rusty Zinn, said something I probably shouldn't repeat because I'll never forget it, but it's true. You know, Rusty Zinn, I know Marc knows Rusty pretty well. He's a blues and reggae guy. He's really a great guy. Anyway, he said he and his old blues friends used to call reggae flat tire music.
Hmm.
Yeah.
What was meant by that?
Never figure it out. And in fact, Stuart Copeland from the Police never figured it out. In fact, the Police broke up because Steve couldn't deal with it. Stuart Copeland couldn't play a reggae drum beat for shit. It's not easy. So if it turns out that flat tire music, or I would now say dub film, a flat tire film, it's all about this weird out of sync. Something's missing. You're actually being exposed to the fact that half the image is always black anyway, except for our persistence of vision as a human, you know. And so the epitome of that movie is when they showed it at the Castro Theater with Black Joy. So the San Francisco Film Festival showed this really great reggae movie, Black Joy, which is really hard to find. It's really good. It's about Jamaicans living in England. And they selected dub film to show before it. So I go to the Castro Theater. It's just a giant theater. I mean, you've been there. I'm sure you both been there. Oh my God, they're going to show my 16. And I know the projectionist because I was in the projectionist union. And I know they have a 16 millimeter projector, you know, because they're really into all kinds of film. I go, oh, this is going to be unbelievable. So they run fucking dub film on that giant screen with really good lighting. And it really doesn't matter how well it's focused. And that film jumps off the screen and attacks the audience. There's so much latent imagery that only your brain creates that's not in the movie. And the people start screaming and clapping. They went berserk. And of course, it's the only time I bet that movie's ever been shown that way. But it just made me realize, oh my God, there's another whole type of filmmaking, stuff that isn't in the movie that can be generated by your movie. I'm not talking about stroboscopic epileptic fits or something. You know, I'm talking about kind of a joyful response.
Yeah, I think you're tapping into that natural bliss that all humanity has, that you were alluding to earlier in our conversation. That, like when you see the Van Gogh painting and you get filled with that eternal bliss. It sounds like dub film tapped into that eternal bliss of the audience.
Yeah, I didn't think of it that way, but it's true. And it's also, and I did transcendental meditation. That's what happened to me when I went to Whittier, which was 67 to 68. And that's when the Maharishi happened with the Beatles. And there was this incredible interest in transcendental meditation. And the Maharishi opened up a little office in Beverly Hills. So I drove into LA and went to the Maharishi, and he wasn't there, but they took me into a little room, gave me some flowers, gave me my mantra, sent me on my way. And I use that mantra today. I use it every time I get my blood pressure done. Oh, wow. In fact, when I was in the hospital for some major shit, it was hilarious because people would run into my room. Oh my God, what are you doing, Mike? You're going to die. You're going to die. What are you doing? Oh, I'm just looking at Facebook. And then later, and then I'd say, hey, keep looking at the monitor. And then I just go into my mantra in my head. And I said, just watch the monitor for a couple of minutes. And they go, holy fuck, how are you doing that? I go, well, it's a little known fact, but I don't need all your drugs. You just need to teach people to meditate with a simple, repeatable phrase. And go into the eternal, I didn't use that phrase, but since we're using it, eternal bliss state, because that's when I finally had transcendental meditation work, what happens is a trap door opens up between the words and you fall into this space. And it's not like in the movie Get Out, where the trap door is into this horrible racial arrogance nightmare of hell. You know, you're into the actual state of being without all the shit, without the human condition.
Without the narrative,
without the ego, no ego, no id, no self doubts, no self, and you're just there, and that's, I think, what David Lynch talks about when he talks about how he uses transcendental meditation for the horribly bizarre films he comes up with, which I love. I don't know if you've seen episode 8 of Twin Peaks: The Return, but that's a must see. I mean, basically, David Lynch made an underground movie, and he put it as episode 8 of Twin Peaks: The Return, and it just stands alone. You don't need to know anything, but just watch that. You know, and he's another Montana guy. He's from Missoula, like Mark.
Well, I'm actually the Doran's from Missoula. Doran was born.
That's true, but
Denver.
You grew up in Missoula, though.
Yeah, I did. I was a baby there for my early years.
Snake River
3 or
Canyon.
4.
You were in Snake River Canyon. Now that's no bullshit.
That's right. Right there.
Go out and play, Mark.
The thing, this idea of emptiness in music and then in visual art, it all starts to weave together into this performance art that you begin to do in a live setting, which there's no other experience that's similar, I think, in the modern history, the last 50 years of club experience. And it combines all of these elements. And unfortunately, the words world beat are the only way we could figure out how to describe it. But it's so much beyond that limitation, those words. But it turns out that every couple of nights, Friday and Sunday nights, you're running what essentially is a visual music improv. It's like a jam band for light. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yeah, it's a 5-hour epic film.
Right?
Every fucking week. And it was never the same.
Right.
Where's that happening?
It all, and I got it all on tape, but there's all those zits in it because of the stupid. He didn't have a time code corrector on the video tape. But I always thought the time will come when we can run those tapes through a machine and it'll fix all that. So I'm not so worried about it. But almost all those shows are taped.
And that experience was built off of all of the experiences we're talking about now. And it became a live performance art for you of creating this experience which inspired people to dance, which is the next level, right? You take people out of passive viewing and then you get them to move their bodies. And now you're activating another part of the network in the body that brings them into a higher level of that bliss state we're talking about. Right. And then it was so amazing to watch the crowds build in there. It took a couple of years for people to finally figure it out. But over time, eventually, it was named one of the best nights out in what was that magazine? Oh goodness, Details magazine. It was a top 10 night out in America on a national scale. But these 5-hour improvised films that you created live twice a week for almost 10 years, and then there's this sort of falling apart of society and all of the infrastructure which had held you up, your radio work, this club work, it all came crashing down. And you then had to rebuild your life from the bottom up in Montana. And that's kind of what had you return to the land of your parents, right?
Yeah, I thought I owed it to my ancestors to continue their instinct to move here. And not have it lost totally from our family, because at that point it was all gone. Everybody had moved away.
Yeah. And you went through a real dark night of the soul. There was a long period where you were just barely hanging on up there, taking care of Grandma Dorothy and trying to take care of your family. And the glory of being a creator was really dormant, right? It was like it had almost gone to sleep because survival had taken over all of your energetic abilities. And so the fact that you're producing 2 music shows now a week, it's a rebirth of your creative spirit. And I don't really want to get caught too much in that dark night, but it's part of the hero's journey, right? We're talking about that mythology, that to go through the underworld and to reemerge and to be reborn again. So what do you think's next?
Well, we had Catherine Rose in 1982, and all of a sudden, we turned my film editing room into her baby room because of our small apartment. And so I packed up all this stuff that I had. I was going to move from dub film into a whole bunch of more bipack on the printer ideas, because you can also tri-pack. You can do all kinds of fun stuff. And I still have that printer. I still have all that stuff. It's all up here. And everything's in really good shape. I found out when my Time Off movie was just digitized that since I moved to Montana and I moved to a place where it's pretty much no humidity and 55 degrees year round where I keep my stuff, my films are incredibly good shape. And
that's awesome.
So I really feel like I'm on the beginning of this, especially since I went through this mortality crisis with my health problems. I feel like I'm about to do some remodeling at the house, which is going to be crucial to this. And I'm going to have a real work table where all my stuff's on one big wide table, all the audio, video stuff. And this radio show, like you said, is kind of my entryway on a really low budget. That's really what I love about the radio show. I can really produce and be exposed. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm exposing myself to all this inspiration. The music I'm hearing on a regular basis, I mean, it just continually blows my mind. And I'm continually trying to now, as I did with reggae in the 70s and 80s, trying to fill in all these holes in 60s music I missed out on, and so even though I'm really glad you mentioned the radio shows, this is really important to my revival. So I'm just really hoping that maybe it won't be next year, but certainly within the next couple of years, I will be set up to wherever it leads. And I cannot think about clicks or likes or any monetary reward. I mean, it was one of the reasons everybody went dormant in the early 90s with a lot of the stuff I was working on, was there was this war on multiculturalism, which was initiated by Rush Limbaugh and Liz Cheney and Newt Gingrich. And you can look that's what's really good about the Republican guys. They do all this stuff in the open. They're so sure of themselves. So there was this whole thing to completely, and it's still there. These people have not changed, even though they're at least coming around to maybe electing somebody who believes in democracy as their leader. But it remains that that's good. God, I lost my train of thought.
You were talking about how radio was going to bring you through into a new creative period in the next couple of years.
Yeah, so there was this war on multiculturalism, which then ended up really, really heavy after 9/11, and none of the artists could even get into our country anymore. And the whole WOMAD festival was destroyed. I mean, everything, all the world music shows on MTV, VH1, Bravo, they all went away. Radio got worse and worse. If you look at the Rick Beato videos, we ended up with basically 5 people picking all the music that was heard on the radio in the United States, all produced by the same 2 or 3 producers. That's why everything sounds exactly the same. Of course, nowadays, everybody can make an Abbey Road sounding recording in their living room or do a TikTok video. And the talent or even basically children in this country have no film history instruction whatsoever. I taught, I was teaching college during that dormant period, and I discovered from the foreign exchange students that American kids really don't know anything about movies, nothing. And so they know nothing about advertising and propaganda and what happened with, turning a political party into a bunch of slogan makers who have no policies, who the whole thing is about, the freedom to bully and gouge and get away with crimes.
That's a great byline for a presidential run: the freedom to bully and gouge.
Gouge and commit crimes. And you got to lay that on every one of these guys. And I don't care if they're your oldest, bestest friends. I have so many people I know that have fallen into this shit since the early 90s. It's like impossible to not be seduced by their crap. It's like, look at my face here on your broadcast. There I am. That's my attitude towards this whole thing. This entire thing we're talking, this entire platform, everything about it is illegitimate, illegal, illiberal, and not worthy of having my face showing.
Okay, but there is another side to it. My son,
What? When are we going to do something about it?
my son loves producing music. He loves it. And he is able, like you said, he has the professional equipment in his bedroom to create music, and he can send pieces to his friends who live in other parts of the country. They send it back to him, and via Spotify and other platforms, he can put it out to the world at really no cost, where before the gatekeeper was $250,000 price tag in order to record something of quality and put it out to the world.
Yeah, the problem is, and that you actually reminded me, Greg, of what I was trying to get to. So despite the fact that the end of this whole process for me to create more films, to create more music, to create anything creative, there's no support at the end of the chain. There's nothing.
That is true. There is no monetary
There is absolutely nothing. So it was never there when I was doing Midnight Dread on KTIM. I had no idea if anybody was listening for years.
What about when you moved to KFOG?
That's the point.
Did that change when you moved to KFOG?
Yeah, I was on KFOG. This concentration on attention is sick. Because you can get the attention of people in the most horrible ways. Look at the shit Facebook is putting in front of people.
Yeah, Hitler's very well known.
You know? Yeah. Oh my God.
But
you know, pornography and violence. Come on, let's just pump that out. We'll get all kinds of eyes.
Yeah.
Look at The Sopranos. Have you seen the Sopranos documentary? Oh my God, is that disturbing?
I haven't seen this.
Oh my God. Anyway, we're almost at the end of our time. Yeah, I kind of like David Chase, but that is one sick puppy.
Wow.
And I don't think sitting around watching a movie because somebody's going to get whacked unexpectedly is entertaining.
Did you ever see the movie Requiem for a Dream?
No, I don't think so.
I forget the gentleman's name. He did the movie Pi. Anyway, it's one of those movies, or Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer.
Okay.
Those are two movies that I think are brilliant films. And I also say in the same breath, I don't know if I'd recommend them because they're such a disturbing experience in watching them.
Yeah, I'm getting that way about a lot of movies now. And especially the old ones where everybody's drinking. I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of drinking and mayhem.
Yeah.
Oh my God! I mean, it's like they're inextricable, and it's this completely dead consciousness from everybody having the effects of alcohol, which I swear to God lasts for days. Even one sip can affect people for days. And if that's the civilization we've been growing in and keeping history of, we are in big, big trouble. And it still looks like Trump could be elected.
Well, and if we don't have time, Mark, you can cut this off. But I'm wondering.
Let's let it roll for another 10 minutes, and then we probably do need to
Okay, yeah, we should get you guys going on your next one.
So one thing I'm wondering, with your knowledge of the Rastafarian and reggae music and the culture, I've always had this element of marijuana plays such, in my understanding, significant element to the spirituality of Rastafari. And you're talking about inebriation and the negative effects of alcohol. In your experience and your knowledge, is there a positive vibration with marijuana that taps into that eternal bliss?
Yeah. Our whole body is made up of cannabinoid receptors.
In a way, this
And
is
you piss out your beer like within 20 minutes. And the body holds on to the cannabis for months.
got it.
And there's no pulmonary effect whatsoever. That's been really interesting with all the doctors I've experienced the last 3 years.
Huh.
When I bring up cannabis, it's just a non-issue with all of them. It's really phenomenal. And in fact, they actually see it now as a way to mitigate all this shit like fentanyl and OxyContin. Yeah, it's just really sad we still haven't studied it at all. Really.
The refinement of these compounds, the generation of a synthesis of things that are in nature, creates a disconnect between the actual spiritual content that's available. With cannabis, right, there's this natural thing, but when you reduce it down to just the pure crack aspect of it, then people start to get polluted behind it. They get too much concentration. So there's, even with that, if you over scientize it, if you over concentrate it, it pulls you out of harmony with nature. It takes you out. And one of the beautiful things about your work as a filmmaker with this idea of non-narrative exposition, in this idea that there's a transcendental state that's available to us naturally, and that light and sound can bring us to a closer relationship with the divine that exists within us. We're getting the opportunity now to just sort of move back towards art giving us that opportunity to create that. And you know, there was a bit of a renaissance with the election of Obama. And if things go okay in November and we get Kamala, there's issues with that too, like because of the structural aspects of what she's working with. But the possibility that people can regain their connection to the divine through art, I think opens up, because we are less consumed with the trickery and the fakery and the manipulation and the consumerism and all of these things. And so looking at you as an artist, my hope is that you'll have another renaissance yourself now that you've reached the level where both your kids are relatively stable in their adult life, and you could reignite this part of your own creative process. Because the inspiration that you're responsible for, when we see what the seed that you planted with KTIM, and then the way that you help Bill produce these shows in the Bay Area, and you just continued with the Kennel Club to make available to people mana, right? The nutrients that are available, that we can't measure the impact of that. So many people who, I'm sure you've heard this before, they say to you, my goodness, like, I'm so grateful for what you enlightened me with, what you brought me to understand. Right. And the audience can forgive me for being in this moment honoring my elder, because he really did. If you just go to Mixcloud and check out his work, or go to midnightdread.com and listen to what's available. And then, you know, we're working on getting some of these films available to you. Now, Doug, you've said you've resisted getting things digitized at this point because you don't want it to just get out there and be out there for free. It needs to be something people savor. And it's like when you actually have to grow the salad fixings and then put it on the table, the experience is so much richer, right? Not only nutritionally is there more value from the soil, but because you actually had to craft it, right? So when you have to earn the opportunity to view a piece of art like the kind that you've created over the years, it has more density to the nutrient aspect of it. And I'm so grateful that you've persevered and that you're such a fiery, dedicated person to creating these kinds of, you know, boundaries around what you will and won't let happen with your art and with your visage. And I'm praying every day that you will get to do more, because there's such a powerful, powerful force. And as we wind down, we have one question we're going to ask. But before that, I just want to get like any last thoughts or any last comments that you wanted to bring in.
Well, you triggered all kinds of really heavy things I wanted to say.
Go.
And I forgot all of them. Yeah. I mean, and some of the heaviest things I wanted to say, it just goes to say that I won't say them because there's just so much. But what we're looking for here, folks, is what's in some ancient books in Africa. In the Lee Perry documentary that talks about Lee Perry, the genius of paradise. There's some ancient books pre-Alexandria fire in little tiny stone buildings in deepest Ethiopia that talk about Jah's original instructions. And there was one, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty simple. And we're born into paradise. We're here. And our job is to create. And our job is to create music, art, and chant, basically. And so when art is treated like an add-on and something that freeloaders and dilettantes and scammers do for 10,000 years, which is the way art is treated, especially in the United States, we're on the wrong path. And of course, once you think that this actually might be paradise, we better get busy.
Marc, that is heavy and enlightening and beautiful. Thank you.
So,
yeah, go ahead. What's the gotcha question?
Okay, so this question is a question we ask everyone that comes on the show. And I just want to qualify it by saying, in light of all of the depth that you've brought before, it may feel like a bit of a letdown to you and others. But here it is, in dedication to our stupid silliness. Here's the question, Doug. Eminem or Foo Fighters?
Oh, Foo Fighters.
Awesome. Why?
How come?
Yeah.
How come that was, you answered that quickly? How come that was your answer? What's behind that?
I guess they're just true to their roots.
Got it.
Now, what was the group Wyatt Lauryn Hill was in? The Foo something?
Fugees.
Yeah, I had a brain fart there. I almost put Foo Fighters up with Fugees. And I think I went. Was Mark? Were you the guy who went to the Fugees concert with me? It was a private event that nobody knew about. It was the Fugees. I thought it was you.
Or I might have lost that brain cell, one or the other.
Yeah. Anyway, it was at some tiny little club in the Mission, and I'll never forget because there they are, the three Fugees, and they're just really becoming the hottest thing. And we're in this tiny room with them, and they're doing some of their greatest stuff. And Lauryn Hill is just amazing. But they're saying motherfucker and motherfucker over and over again. I finally shout out during a quiet part. Quit saying motherfucker. Honor your mother.
Right.
And it was just like the whole place just went dead silent.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's the kind of like reality checks we really need. Because there's a lot of sloppiness in language, and it's like calling Trump, a TV reality star when he's a fake TV host. And I swear to God, if people would just say that since 2015, and I see it all the time. I saw, what's his name? The scientist, Dyson or Tyson. He used
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah, he had a thing the other day where he said reality TV star. He had this great sentence, and he put reality TV star in the middle of it. And I saw it this morning, somebody else that's really hip and smart. I tell you, man, when you use words that don't communicate and actually communicate the opposite, it has a tremendous effect on reality. So and one of those words, and I try to tell this to people I work with words on, and it's words you would never expect that have been ruined or neutralized by the Republicans' misuse of language for 70 years now. So even common sense means absolutely nothing. And people use that. I mean, Kamala uses it. Now, the interesting thing about Kamala, I should get off because we're past the time, but that guy, George Lakoff in Berkeley, the word expert, is really why she turned the campaign around and why the Democrats are having all this success all of a sudden. And George Lakoff, the linguistic professor from Berkeley, has been pushing this stuff since the 1970s. And because she's from Berkeley, she knew about him and immediately hired him. And that's where they came up with that phrase, it's nobody's business, and freedom this, freedom that. And it's amazing what you can do with words. Yeah. Absolutely amazing. So you choose your words carefully, you know? And if you say reality TV star, you might as well just not even speak. Because once you say those words that neutralize everything you said, and in fact, I learned this from moving to Montana and meeting a bunch of Democrats who go out into real rural Montana, because Great Falls is a big city. And you go out into real rural Montana, and these guys, they'll just tell you at their political meetings, they just want to go home with scalps. They're not interested in compromising with liberals. They don't care about liberals, and they just sit around and laugh their asses off because you use our words all the time. You use our words and our framing all the time, and just the framing, narrative, stories, all those kind of words. Don't use those words. This isn't make playtime, makeup time. You know, this is reality. You know. And so when you say common sense, which is a word that means totally different things to different people, you're not communicating a damn thing. In fact, what you're actually doing is denigrating expertise. And you're denigrating expertise on a massive level. And that is part of their game. And it's this to use slogans like less taxes, more government, when the country goes from 140 million people to 400 million people. I mean, it's that kind of disconnect in logic, evidence, and facts and truth that we need. And we don't need common sense. We need logic, evidence, and some kind of connection to reality to talk to each other in a meaningful way. Anyway, sorry, I went way over.
No, don't be sorry, man. This is what we come for. This is exactly what we wanted from you.
Yeah, we ended up right where what needs to be said, because it's that stuff. And you, like I said, you kind of triggered me a couple of times, but that was one of the major thoughts that came to me. My God, there's so many things that are like key to the experience of life, and like that movie Tree of Life. Man, most people haven't even put them on film. And when you watch a movie like Tree of Life and you see them, you go, wow. And of course, maybe most people, they just wash over people. You know, I have to realize that a lot of people don't observe like I do.
Yeah, well, once you've been shown how to sit quietly and see the spaces and hear the emptiness, then your presence with the art can be that much greater. And thank you so much for your time. When we publish this, we'll let you know for sure. We'll include links to all of the radio shows and a bunch of the other things, like how to rent your films at Canyon Cinema. So those of you who want to actually see celluloid and are willing to make the effort to see something that's been produced for a specific visual medium, we'll have access to that. Thank you so much for your generosity with us today. Thank you for your generosity for your audiences over the year and your devotion to the ideals that we might all receive something greater in this paradise through the works of artists and creators like you. We will talk soon. Much love, and we're out.
Love up.
This is the Ghost Town Sound. Coming live and select from Otaku, Montana. Way up by the dread waters of the Missouri River,
There's a series of falls, the Great Falls. And for thousands of years, the place was known as Otaku, which is Blood and Blackfoot for the sound, the sound, the sound, the sound, the sound, the sound, It was a special sound only known to this place. It wasn't the sound of the falls. It wasn't the sound of the shifting sands. It wasn't the sound of the wind. Otaku was a mystical, booming vibration and went on and on for centuries. Then one day, Sacagawea and York and the Corps of Discovery and Lewis and Clark came up the river, and they heard the sound, the sound, the sound. It was a mysterious and unique sound. They didn't know its name was Otaku, yet they wrote about it in their journals, and they tried to locate the origin of the sound. But the sound could not be found. A little later, other people traveled up the river, and they came to subdue, conquer, and harvest nature. Very slowly the sound started to fade away, and the falls were hobbled, and the giant springs nearby tamed, and the sound faded away. And then it was gone. But now it's back, coming to you strong. The sound that has a name, O-Ta-Ku, the ghost town sound.
Recording stopped.